Standing on this hill in the heart of Northern Ireland, I made an appeal to everyone to join us in keeping the fight against COVID and to push down the curve of infection and to take those difficult daily decisions to do the right thing, to stay at home, and everybody has in their thousands. To all of you who have taken action, who have changed how you manage your everyday life, I say thank you, because 3 weeks on, it has made a major difference. We have maintained the rate of infection in our community at well below 1, in the region of 0.75 to 0.85. And in real terms, this means that many thousands of people have been protected from this deadly virus, some of whom would have not survived contact. In our local government areas with the highest figures recently, like Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon and Mid-Ulster, the rate of cases per 100,000 has halved, with Newry, Mourne and Down seeing a fall of 2/3. Now, we know that this has taken an incredible effort from everyone, individuals, businesses, local government, faith leaders and community and voluntary groups. And as an executive, we have identified a range of supports to assist individuals and organisations, and the Finance Minister will shortly provide a funding update. Earlier, the Executive did, however, agree to a £37.7 million package of support set out by the Minister for the Economy for those in full-time higher education here. And this includes a one-off COVID disruption payment of £500 to all eligible full-time higher education students at publicly funded higher education institutions and further education colleges in Northern Ireland. Hardship support to students in need, with an emphasis on targeting those in lower income household brackets, and an allocation to the higher education institutions to support digital inclusion for students. And lastly, an increased support for our students' unions and tackling mental health concerns. In relation to our vaccination programme, as of yesterday, there had been over 289,000 vaccines delivered to 263,735 people. Well over 250,000 people, approximately 1 in every 7 people in Northern Ireland, have already received a vaccine. Those in all of our care homes have had a first dose, with 90% having had the second dose as well. Approximately 90% of all of our over 80s have now been vaccinated. The Health Minister advised us today that another significant batch of AstraZeneca vaccine arrived yesterday and will have been distributed to all GP practices by today. So I commend all those who are involved in the vaccine programme for their efforts. It's something all of us in Northern Ireland should be very proud of. The pressures on our hospitals are, however, still significant, and we are mindful that the numbers requiring intensive care support remains at a high level. So our experience over this last year has shown us that there is a fragility to all of our hard-won gains. This is particularly so now as we continue to assess and monitor the transmission here of what is called the Kent variant. So this is not the time to ease up, but to really push on and to exert the maximum control on the virus. This time last year, none of us would have known anyone with COVID-19. Sadly, that's no longer the case now, and it has come close by or into so many homes with devastating impact. So can I finish by saying, like so many of you, I was deeply saddened by the passing of Captain Sir Tom Moore from COVID-19 this week. His story embodied exactly the spirit that our society needs to get through all of this. And I think he struck a chord with both young and old. And he told us to keep taking the small steps and remember, tomorrow is a better day. Conor.
Thank you, Arlene. Well, the Executive had a very detailed discussion today on the public health situation. And as a result of the restrictions in place, the public's adherence to those measures, the R rate has been maintained below 1. And that's welcome news, because it means the COVID-19 epidemic is decreasing. We have also made good progress on the vaccination programme. As the First Minister has said, more than 250,000 people across the north have now received a vaccine. And while we can be encouraged by that, it is no time to become complacent. The Health Service remains under serious pressure, with 671 COVID patients being looked after in hospitals and 68 in ICU. It will take an ongoing serious effort from all of us to stay on top of the virus, to stop it from spreading and to keep the pressure off the Health Service. We know how tough these restrictions are for families, for workers, for businesses, and the Executive is working tirelessly to support people through these difficult times. Over the last 2 weeks, the Executive have approved a further £420 million for our COVID-19 response. Almost £40 million of this will go to support students who have been through a particularly tough time in terms of restrictions to education and the hardship that the pandemic has caused. Nearly 40,000 students enrolled in full-time higher education course here will receive a one-off £500 payment. The funding will also increase student hardship funding and help meet costs associated with remote learning and support students with mental health provision. I have also provided further funding to meet the challenges of education through COVID, including resources for blended learning and support for childcare. Businesses continue to face immense challenges. Over the last 2 weeks, I have allocated £130 million of additional funding to support businesses. This has financed a new support scheme for larger hospitality and tourism businesses and an increase in the amounts paid under the Company Directors Scheme. It will also ensure the continuation of the COVID business restriction support schemes and the localised restriction support schemes, which to date has delivered £130 million to over 12,000 businesses. Our airports and our airlines continue to face huge challenges, and I have provided additional funds for airports, which are a critical part of our economic structure. I have also allocated further funding for TransLink, support for the Housing Executive and £35 million towards the teachers' pay settlement. I am very conscious that there are individuals and businesses who have not yet benefited from financial support, and I therefore continue to encourage ministers to bring forward proposals urgently, particularly for sectors that have not yet benefited from that support. Thank you.
Can I turn to comments that have been made by the Chief Constable today, in which he appealed for people to step back from the brink of violence here in Northern Ireland, and he specifically called on politicians to de-escalate their language and to use calm language. How important do you think it is for you all to do that?
Well, I think what is important, and of course we had a very constructive executive today. I know for some people they find that hard to believe given all of the drama that's going on elsewhere, but we did have a very good executive meeting today. I think it is important that we say to everyone to channel whatever frustrations they have through constitutional politics. It's one of the reasons why we have set out a 5-point plan to deal with the frustrations, particularly in the Unionist and Loyalist communities. And we'll keep engaging with everyone around all of those issues. I do think it's incredibly important that people do stay calm, but that they focus their energies on constitutional politics and take things forward in that fashion.
Well, that's exactly, Tracy, what we've been saying over the last number of days. We've been calling on people to be calm, to use the mechanisms that we have already built into the withdrawal agreement to work our way through difficulties with the protocol, but difficulties generally with the aftermath of the EU exit. And I think it is very clear that we do need a dialling down of the rhetoric. And we've heard some comments which I think are dangerous from people who should know better on radio and programmes yesterday. Of course, those people will never be the ones who will either suffer as a consequence of any action taken, nor be involved in it themselves and will engage in some hand-wringing if violence does break out. So I think the comments that the Chief Constable has made today echo those that Michelle O'Neill and others have been saying for a number of days now. And we need to be able to work through the problems we have. The uncertainties that businesses are facing at the moment need to be fixed so that people can get on with trying to prosper, and workers should have the entitlement to go to their work free from any feeling of unsafety or a threat.
And looking at the politics of what happened yesterday, in the House of Commons, Boris Johnson said that they would use all means, including triggering Article 16, to make sure that the border trade is protected. And yet after last night's or yesterday's meeting with Michael Gove and Maros Sefcovic, it appears that the British government's position is to fully implement the protocol. So where does that leave the DUP in terms of trust? And what does it say to those who are championing or pushing for the protocol? Where does that leave you?
I think in terms of what the Prime Minister said, not only to me personally, but on the floor of the House of Commons, it is important that we move through this and we move through it quickly, because there are severe difficulties with the operation of the protocol. We've seen that from our businesses and our consumers, so it's important that he hears the voice very clearly. He did hear that very clearly yesterday and said that he would, if necessary, trigger Article 16, these are his words, or indeed use any other measures, i.e. legislate in the House of Commons if that was needed. So that, to me, is the UK Government's position, because that's what was said by the Prime Minister on the floor of the House of Commons.
Well, we're very clear that the disruption that we're currently facing, the disruption to trade, is as a consequence of Brexit. It's something we campaigned against. It's something that the people from here, I think, recognised was going to create difficulties for us, and they voted against leaving the EU. The protocol is there to mitigate against the worst damage that Brexit will cause, and is there also to protect the Good Friday Agreement in all its parts. And so I think there are arrangements under the withdrawal agreement to try and resolve difficulties. I look forward to the meeting next week between the EU Commission and the British Government under that joint committee arrangement that they have, to try and work through these issues. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to give whatever assistance we can so that people who are here, who are concerned about their future, as a consequence of the entire experience of Brexit, and that will roll on for some time, that we work through these issues, we try and give as much certainty as possible in the time ahead, and we make sure that the protocol, which was put in place for a specific purpose, is allowed to fulfil that purpose.
Arlene, just to return for a second to the Chief Constable's remarks, he singled out remarks by David Campbell of the Loyalist Communities Council, a man you will know quite well. He said, if it comes to the bit where we have to fight physically to maintain our freedoms with the UK, then so be it. The Chief Constable said those remarks were inflammatory. What do you make of them? And for Conor Murphy, it isn't just unionists who are suffering because of the way the protocol has been implemented. Instead of accusing unionists of being reckless and whipping up hysteria, is there some way you could work with them to bring about easements or mitigations of the protocol, whatever way you want to put it?
Well, first of all, Gareth, I didn't hear David make those comments yesterday. But I have to say I was quite shocked when I heard them just about 10 minutes ago, actually, when somebody related the comments to me. Obviously, from my perspective, I am always against any forms of violence. I believe in constitutional politics. It's something I passionately believed in since I entered politics when I was 17, 18 years of age, and that's not today or yesterday. So I have no change there. Constitutional politics is the way forward. I know people are very frustrated. But they need to channel that frustration through constitutional politics so that we can effect change in that fashion.
And can I say, just firstly in relation to those remarks, people like David Campbell should know better. It is never they that will be doing any fighting. They will encourage others who will go out and either cause harm to themselves or others and lose their liberty or their lives as a consequence of that. And that's been the experience over many, many years. Well, people need to be very careful with their words and the intent behind those words. In relation to the protocol, I mean, you're attributing all of the difficulties that we're experiencing from the 1st of January to the protocol. And quite clearly there was a lack of preparedness among many British companies who trade between Britain and here as to what the arrangements would be. And I think what we need to do, and we're of course determined to iron out all of those problems with our executive colleagues. We want to make sure that that is done in a calm fashion, using the mechanisms that were agreed, with the input from the executive, the input from the British Government, the input from the European Commission. It was always anticipated that there were going to be difficulties. You can't change trading arrangements and not create some difficulties. What we have a responsibility to do is to try and deal with those difficulties collectively in a calm and a reasonable manner to make sure that people don't suffer. And it's not just unionists who suffer. Of course, everyone will suffer if arrangements aren't got right, but they cannot all be attributed to the protocol. There are a range of things happening here, and some of that is to do with a lack of preparedness and running a deal in relation to leaving the EU right to the wire. It created absolutely no time for preparation for the arrangements that might be required afterwards.
This question for Arlene, really. At certain key points in my memory, and I'm sure in yours as well, unionism has mobilised around issues. I'm thinking, first of all, of the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985, when 100,000 unionists or more stood outside the City Hall in Belfast. I'm thinking of the Good Friday Agreement, although admittedly unionists were divided over that. I'm thinking of Drumcree, and I'm thinking most recently of the flag protests at Belfast City Hall again. In all of those fights, unionism ultimately did not win. And it was a time when they were in a stronger position than they are now. What realistic chance have you got of overturning this protocol from a weaker position than unionism was in then?
Well, Gareth, that's a very interesting point because, part of the difficulty in unionism sometimes when they are confronted with very difficult circumstances is that they turn in on themselves and people start to look for Lundies and they start to look for people who they can blame for that. But I have to say, since the actions of the European Commission last Friday, I have seen a coming together of unionism in a very strong way. I, of course, welcome that. This morning, I noted a number of representatives from Loyalism who were speaking in a very calm way and who, again, were saying that they wanted unionism to work together. In our 5-point plan, one of the things that we have set out is the parliamentary petition, and in 7 hours we have reached 25,000 signatures on that. I think that's a very strong way for people to show their dissatisfaction with this protocol. So there are ways to deal with this in a constitutional way, which of course should lead people to work together and not turn in on themselves. And my plea to unionists right across Northern Ireland is not to turn in on ourselves, but actually to focus on what we need to do, and that is around the protocol.
By the Market Hill district of the Orange Order just last weekend?
Well, I think it was a number of people in Market Hill district. I don't think it was the entirety of the district, but I'll leave that as a matter internally for the Orange to deal with. That's a very good example. That's what I'm talking about, people turning in on themselves. And what I'm saying to people is if they focus on where the problem is and focus on how to deal with that, then that is the way forward and not actually being disparate in this problem, because there are ways forward in this, and it is around identifying, because the European Union tells us that what they want to do is to protect the single market. If that is the case, there are ways to do that through looking at what is the risk of goods coming from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, then going on into the single market. There's a much more reasonable way of dealing with that, and I believe that's what we should focus on moving forward.
Staff were moved out of the ports earlier this week, despite police telling them or describing the activities as nothing more than online commentary and graffiti and as low level. Was that decision by Edwin Peace an overreaction, and should the staff be brought back?
I don't think it's ever an overreaction to take a precautionary measure to protect staff, and I think that's what Midden East Antrim did. Unanimously, all of the parties in Midden East Antrim decided that that was the way forward until they had a full risk assessment, and that's exactly what has happened with the department as well. I understand from Gordon Lyons that he is awaiting a police risk assessment. He hoped to have had it yesterday, didn't have it for our executive today, but hopefully we'll have that police risk assessment by this afternoon.
And then, do you think there's merit in carrying out any checks on Great Britain side before coming over to Northern Ireland?
Well, there are already checks, I think, in terms of the documentary checks, which are actually carried out. I might be wrong on this, but I think they are carried out before transit takes place over to Northern Ireland. So some of those already happen, the documentary checks. What this is about is actually the physical checks. And as I understand it, some of the physical checks were quite minimal in any event. So this doesn't actually have the disruptive nature that some people had thought it was going to have. What we're focusing on is actually protecting staff, making sure that they are safe, and importantly that they feel safe at their work as well, because nobody should have to go to work under the threat of violence.
No, sorry, just in answer, I reiterate the point that Arlene has made, that people should feel free from threat. They shouldn't have to consider their own safety and go into their work. And the police, I think, need to very quickly bottom out the level of that to give a very accurate assessment of whether that is something which should be taken seriously or something which doesn't merit the actions that the Council felt obliged to take. I think we need to get behind also what that communication was, and there was some discussion in the Executive today about that, where one council chose a course of action and Belfast City Council didn't choose that course of action. But I think for the safety of the workers and for their own peace of mind, we need to get this resolved very quickly, and I know there is a report to come today, and we want to see the workers back in place working safely as quickly as possible.
Thanks for the opportunity to ask some questions. You're both involved in a power-sharing arrangement. You've both been involved in compromises in the past. Is the solution to this row about the protocol to scrap the protocol or to address what is a combination of the unintended consequences of policy decisions, to take small steps?
Go for it.
Well, we're not involved in a row over the protocol. And we've been deliberately not drawn into a row over the protocol. What we want to see are the arrangements. We didn't want Brexit. We voted against it. The people who live here voted against it. We always had offered the view that there was no good outcome to come from it. The protocol is in place to try and mitigate against the damage that Brexit will do in terms of trading arrangements. And now we're seeing some of those difficulties arise. So there are measures in place to work through that. The Executive has a responsibility as well as the British Government and the EU Commission working through these issues, because we have to advise and support people here who are affected by all of this. We have to look, as I think the Invest NI were saying today, we'll have to look for the opportunities in relation to all of this, the ability to continue to trade into that huge market which is the European Union, and to trade with Britain as well. That offers an opportunity to people here, and we have to make sure that we're in a position to take advantage of it. So let's work our way calmly and carefully through the issues that we're facing over these days. They were not unanticipated that there were going to be difficulties. Let's work our way through them, and then let's give people that certainty to avail of the opportunities that might arise from the particular unique position that we here have in relation to Europe and Britain.
So, Tommy, I think the problem with the protocol, which we warned about at the time, is that it has caused a disruption in the East-West balance. And we know under the Belfast Agreement that the balance is about North-South internally and then East-West as well. And the balance East-West has been disrupted. And I suppose the disappointment for me is that there is no acknowledgement of that from either Dublin or indeed from the European Commission yesterday evening either. So unfortunately we will have to find a way forward, and it will have to be found quickly, because the disruption is causing community tensions, and of course we do want everyone to stay calm and we do want people to act through constitutional politics, but if they're being ignored then they become even more angry and even more tense, and therefore I think that comments like it's only kinks and teething problems and the way we're going to fix it is actually through rigorous implementation of the protocol is not going to answer the concerns that are very much in evidence, not even just in the Unionist community and the Loyalist community, but right across Northern Ireland now.
I notice you didn't use the phrase scrap the protocol. Last Friday, the European Commission made a grievous error of judgment. It was challenged by the British and Irish governments and others. It was corrected within 3 hours. Last year, the Northern Ireland Secretary went into the House of Commons and deliberately stated that his government was prepared to break an international treaty if necessary. It took several weeks to change that position. He is not being punished or reminded of what was an act of aggression. Since then, people have moved on. Is it time to move on from the error made by the European Commission, or is it constantly going to be brought up as the cause of grievance and as an accelerator of tension in Northern Ireland?
Well, you know what the European Union did last Friday isn't the cause of the grievance, let's be very clear, in Northern Ireland currently. It's the fact that our trade has been fundamentally disrupted by the protocol. And just for clarity, Tommy, I think the way to proceed is to scrap the protocol and to have a much better understanding as to how we can help protect the single market of the European Union through the assessment of risk, instead of trying to separate part of the United Kingdom off in terms of we are part of the United Kingdom. We know that under the Belfast Agreement it's down to the consent of the people of Northern Ireland what happens in relation to their sovereignty. And I actually think the government sleepwalked into the protocol thinking that they would sort it out later. Let's get Brexit done now and we'll sort the difficulties with the protocol out later. Now the protocol is coming home to roost, as it were, and all of the difficulties that we warned about are coming to fruition. So there's a need to focus on it. and there's a need to find a way forward in a calm way. But for me, the best way to deal with it is to scrap the protocol and to look at what the risk is to the European single market, because for me, it's negligible.
Well, can I say, I think you're correct. It's a question of how you choose to react to things. And the Secretary of State's comments a number of months ago were hugely concerning to all of us, because this part of the world really relies on agreements that are made, agreements that are held to, agreements that are implemented, a clear understanding of where we're going with things, and a kind of cavalier attitude to breaking international agreements has huge consequences for us here. So the responsibility of us who are in leadership is to work our way calmly through these issues. And there are mechanisms for doing that. There are mechanisms between the British Government and the European Commission, which is ultimately where the resolution of these things will lie. But we have a responsibility as well to assist people here, to provide leadership, to provide calm leadership, to assist people here, and to make sure that the opportunities, as I said, that the Executive, and I know the Department of the Economy are off looking at this. I've heard Invest NI out today talking about what we can achieve when we get these issues resolved and move forward to try and give people the benefit of that access to the European Union markets, as well as the benefit of the access to the British markets, and how we can make sure we can actually give an advantage to people here and not fixate on some of the present difficulties that we have.
Okay, thank you.